As we move through hour 8 of the government shutdown, we are taking a look at how the funding freeze will affect every inch of the federal government.
Yeah, even federal courts are not immune to government dysfunction. For the specifics on that, I got it. We're joined by the Hill's courts and legal reporter Zach Schonfeld. Zach, good morning to you. What does a government shutdown mean for America's court system?
It means the judiciary will not be spared from this government shutdown. Now, there's two sides to this, the courts themselves and the Justice Department. I'll start with the courts themselves. Today, all judiciary employees are reporting to work. The federal court system has funding at least through Friday to continue operating as normal. But yesterday, I did touch base with the administrative office for the judiciary, and they said after Friday, then they're going to have to take a look to see as to whether some employees need to go on furlough. Now, the courts, they do collect some fees for when you file lawsuits, things of that nature, so they may be able to have some movement around the edges, but very quickly, as we get into next week, the courts could have to curtail their operations. Now, on the Justice Department side, they have already actually begun taking moves just here in the last few minutes to start stopping many of these civil lawsuits implicating the federal government and the Trump administration. Now, criminal proceedings still expected to move forward, but it's those civil lawsuits where the Justice Department is going to start taking moves to slow those down and stop them until the end of the shutdown. And
are there any notable suits we would be familiar with?
Well, so the first one that we actually just got here in the last few minutes that the Justice Department has filed something on the books with a judge asking to halt the case has to do with a grant funding case surrounding domestic violence funding that goes to states and organizations. But that's just the first. Of course, there's just dozens upon dozens of lawsuits proceeding across the country. So you can expect that we're going to see a lot of similar filings in these other cases. Now, that being said, we know that one of the big groups that has been prolifically suing the Trump administration since January, a group called Democracy Forward, they have come out with a statement saying that they believe many of these cases need to continue given how sweeping many of these administration policies are. So this really could be a battle between the Justice Department and plaintiffs as to what's going to happen to these lawsuits during the shutdown.
So we don't know how long the shutdown is going to last. We know Judge Robert Conrad, the director of the administrative office of the U.S. courts, said right now they've got enough money to operate and sustain operations only through October 3rd. What happens then?
Right. You know, this is normal for the courts to have a little bit of buffer there. I mentioned before how, they also have some of these fees where they can, sometimes be able to go a little bit further than maybe, your standard federal agency. The other thing that I think is important to point out here is that judges and employees of the judiciary are treated differently. Under the Constitution, judges' pay can't be reduced. So Supreme Court justices, federal judges, they keep getting paid. Congress has no authority to stop that. But it's these judiciary employees who, as you mentioned, once we get past Friday, if the shutdown is still in effect, we could see many judiciary employees being furloughed.
Before we move on, is there anything else you want to say about that, the shutdown and the consequences of the shutdown on the courts?
One of the interesting things about this stopgap proposal that's in Congress that has been proposed by Republicans that didn't get through, it is mainly a clean package, just 7 weeks of government funding, but there's one big change, and that is a boost for security funding, including for Supreme Court justices. So, we're talking about obviously about judicial operations here, but there's also lots of questions about security funding too.
All right, so let's talk about this deportation case and how it's impacting colleges. A scathing opinion from a judge.
That's right. I have been reading, this constant pattern of Trump administration implementing new policies. They go to court, a district judge blocks it. Now, oftentimes the administration goes up to the Supreme Court and gets a victory there. But at this stage where judges have been stepping in and blocking it, I've got to tell you, this is one of the most scathing rulings I have read against the president ever since January 20th. This is a ruling from Judge William Young. He is an appointee of former President Reagan, just celebrated 40 years on the bench. He serves up in Boston. And he had been considering a case looking at the Trump administration's efforts to deport college students who have participated in pro-Palestinian advocacy. And in this ruling yesterday, he said that violated the First Amendment. But the reason that it's getting so much attention isn't really even just for what he ruled, but for what he said in this opinion. He did everything from someone had actually sent a threat to this judge's chambers. He actually responded to the threatener in his ruling saying, you should come to the courthouse and look at the proceedings and take a look. And there was also another really interesting point where the judge even invoked his wife, who had quoted Trump calling him a bully. I haven't haven't seen that one before, detailing over multiple pages about why he agreed with his wife.
And this isn't the only judge that's doing this. It's like this mini rebellion among the justices.
Yeah, there's really been a lot of, even tensions even within the judiciary about the handling of cases. Judge Young has really been on the front lines of these tensions we've talked about on the show before about these Supreme Court emergency decisions that often come with little explanation. A lot of these federal district judges have been frustrated to see their rulings lifted without much explanation. Judge Young is one of those judges. He again, in his ruling, talked about the Supreme Court's emergency decisions, but it was just back in August when you saw Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh actually saying that Judge Young was defying their orders. So there's a lot of tensions here.
Right.
All right, Zach Schonfeld, we appreciate the time as always. Of course, you can find Zach's reporting on thehill.com, and The Gavel, his newsletter, has already dropped. It drops every Wednesday at 8
Thank you, Zach.